He wasn't supposed to be there that night, and the creature he found wasn't supposed to survive. But fate doesn't care about timing. It cares about lessons. One desperate rescue will ignite a bond that defies instinct, crosses boundaries, and burns through everything he thought he knew about the wild and about himself. Hit like, subscribe, and share where you're watching from before the truth hidden in those mountains finally comes to light. The wind screamed across the frozen Wyoming range, carving through the night like a blade of glass. Ranger Malik Turner, a black veteran who had traded the battlefield for solitude, leaned over the edge of a snow-lashed cliff, his harness-strained rope creaking under the pull of gravity. Below him, tangled in roots and frost, was a gray wolf fighting its last breath. Its fur was matted with blood, the eyes half-lidded in exhaustion, but still burning with something raw resignation, not rage. Malik steadied his breath, tasting iron in the air. Easy now, he muttered, his voice swallowed by the storm. He had seen that same look before in wounded men left behind on sand-colored fields far from home. Over the radio, static hissed. "Turner, copy. Get out of there. The ridge is unstable," but he ignored it. He tightened the strap around his wrist and whispered to himself, "Every life deserves a chance, even the broken ones." Those were his mother's words, the same ones she had told him the night he enlisted, and the same words he whispered at his wife's bedside when cancer took her away. Maybe that's why he was out here again, because saving something, anything, still felt like redemption. The cliff face was slick with ice, the kind that cracked without warning. Malik descended carefully, one boot at a time, his flashlight beam trembling with the wind. The wolf shifted weakly, letting out a hoarse growl. "I know," Malik said, lowering himself another foot. "You don't trust me. Can't say I blame you." The animal was trapped beneath a splintered branch driven into its leg. The wound looked old, infected, the kind that meant death out here. Malik reached for his knife fingers, stiff from the cold. "Hang on, boy. Let's fix this." But as the blade touched the wood, the wolf lunged. Teeth flashed pain ripped through his glove as fangs sank deep into his palm. Malik hissed but didn't pull away. Blood dripped onto the snow, bright and steaming. "Go on," he whispered. "If it helps you trust me, then bite." The wolf's jaw trembled, then released. It didn't run. It didn't even flinch. It just stared at him as if confused by mercy. He saw the same confusion in himself. Malik cut the branch, freeing the leg. The wolf staggered, collapsing into the snow. The storm howled louder, shaking the ground beneath them. Malik pulled at the rope, shouting into the wind, but the radio only crackled back silence. He hooked a loop under the wolf's chest, cinched it tight, and started climbing. The world above was gone, only white fury, and the sound of his heartbeat filled the void. Halfway up, the rope groaned, fibers snapping like dry bone. Malik froze. "No," he muttered, tugging. The anchor pin above shifted. In a split second, the line jerked loose, sending both man and animal plummeting. The fall wasn't far, 15 feet, but the impact knocked the air from his lungs. He rolled, shielding the wolf from the worst of it. The rope tangled around his arm, burning through fabric and skin. For a long moment, there was no sound but the wind. Then a movement, a paw pressed against his sleeve. The wolf's claws hooked the torn fabric, holding it like it meant something. The gesture was small, absurd, and yet it saved him. It gave him a grip, a reason to move. He pulled them both upright, gasping snow biting at his face. "You stubborn old soul," Malik said. "Guess we're both too tired to die." He carried the wolf across the ridge, one step at a time, the animal's weight dragging him sideways. By the time he reached the truck, his vision had narrowed to a tunnel of black and white. He shoved the door open and laid the wolf across the seat. The creature didn't resist, it only shivered. Malik tore off his jacket and wrapped it around the animal. The storm slammed against the windshield, turning the world into a blur. He turned the key engine, coughing to life. "You hang in there," he muttered. "I didn't come this far to bury another friend." The drive back to the ranger cabin was slow, the tires sliding over glassy roads. Malik kept glancing at the wolf. In the flickering dashboard light, he saw its chest rising unevenly. "You're not done," he whispered. "Not tonight." When he pulled up to the cabin, he could barely feel his hands. He opened the door, scooped the animal into his arms, and stumbled inside. Snow tore across the ridgeline in long white ribbons, swallowing every sound except the groan of the wind and the scraping of Malik's boots against ice. His right hand burned from the bite fingers stiffening inside the soaked glove, but he refused to stop. The wolf's body sagged against him limp, but breathing its fur heavy with frozen blood. The rope had been cut in the fall, so he looped it around his shoulder, pulling the animal close as he climbed through the storm. The slope was endless. Every step sent a shock through his knees. Every breath burned like glass in his lungs, but still he moved. "Come on, buddy," he muttered through chattering teeth. "You didn't die down there, and I'm not dying up here." The wolf didn't respond, not even a growl. But when Malik's strength faltered, a cold muzzle brushed against his sleeve, just enough to remind him he wasn't alone. For the first time in years, he prayed not for himself, but for both of them. By the time he reached the truck, dawn had begun to bleed through the clouds, a pale blue ghost over the mountains. His vision tunneled as he yanked open the door and laid the wolf across the seat. Steam rose from their clothes, mixing with the frost on the windshield. He turned the ignition, the engine coughing, wheezing, then catching. The heater sputtered to life, filling the cab with the smell of oil and old leather. Malik looked at his reflection in the rearview mirror, skin gray from exhaustion, eyes bloodshot, a streak of blood drying along his cheek where the rope had burned it raw. "Hell of a night," he murmured. The wolf stirred its paw, twitching, and a low sound escaped its throat, not quite a growl, more like a sigh. "Yeah," Malik said softly. "You and me both." The road to the cabin was nearly invisible. Snowdrifts rose like walls, forcing him to crawl forward at a crawl, headlights cutting narrow tunnels through the dark. He kept one hand on the wheel and one on the wolf's chest, feeling for the faint rhythm beneath his fingers. It was weak, but steady. Somewhere deep inside, beneath the ache and the fatigue, he felt something he hadn't felt in years: purpose. Saving lives used to be his job, then his guilt, and now somehow his salvation. When he finally reached the cabin, the sun was up, but the world was still white. Malik stumbled from the truck, nearly dropping the wolf as his knees buckled. He dragged the animal to the porch, kicking the door open with his heel. The inside smelled of wood smoke and solitude. The old heater clicked to life, spreading a thin breath of warmth. He laid the wolf by the fire, cut the ropes from its chest, and pulled the last of the splinters from its wound with a pair of tweezers. The creature didn't fight. It just trembled, eyes half shut. "You're safe now," Malik whispered. "Don't make me a liar." He cleaned the wound with antiseptic and wrapped it with a torn shirt. The wolf flinched once, then went still again. "That's it," he said. "Good boy." He wasn't sure when he'd started calling it that habit, maybe, or hope. His own hands shook as he stripped off his wet clothes, tossing them over a chair near the fire. His left boot was filled with blood from where the fall had cut through his ankle. He ignored it. The wolf needed heat more than he needed rest. He poured a small bowl of water, setting it near its snout. For a long while, nothing happened. Then just before Malik gave up, the animal's tongue flicked out, touching the water twice. Malik smiled weakly. "There it is, still got some fight in you." He leaned back against the wall, the firelight flickering across his tired face. "Guess that makes two of us." Outside, the storm was still raging. Snow beat against the windows, piling high enough to bury the porch railings. The cabin creaked beneath the wind. Malik stared into the flames, remembering another night years ago. Different snow, different screams. A night in Afghanistan when he'd tried to pull a young soldier out from a burning vehicle. He'd saved the man, but lost 3 others in the blast. For years he'd wondered why that one life was spared. Now, sitting beside a wounded wolf in the middle of nowhere, he wondered if the question had been backward all along. Maybe life didn't save anyone. Maybe it just gave us another chance to make something mean more than pain. He closed his eyes. Sleep came hard and shallow. He dreamed of his wife Emma standing in the doorway of their old home, sunlight framing her in gold. "You're always chasing the broken ones," she said with a smile. "Maybe because I am one," he replied in the dream. When he woke, the fire had dimmed to embers. His fingers were numb. The air was sharp with frost. For a second, he couldn't move. His breath came in ragged bursts. Then something brushed against his chest. He looked down. The wolf was awake barely. Its paw nudged the corner of a blanket that had fallen to the floor, dragging it across him, clumsily, like instinct, like memory. Malik stared, stunned. The wolf's breathing was shallow, but rhythmic, its gaze dull, but aware. Somehow, in its own way, it was returning the kindness. "You crazy thing," Malik whispered, voice cracking. "You just saved me too." He pushed the blanket higher over his chest, then reached out and rested his hand on the wolf's neck. Its heartbeat was faint, but steady beneath his palm. They stayed that way for a long time, two survivors clinging to a fragile warmth against the cold that could have easily taken them both. Outside, the wind finally began to quiet, giving way to silence so heavy it felt sacred. The storm had passed. What remained was the sound of two living beings breathing in rhythm. Different species, same will. Morning light seeped through the cracks in the shutters, painting thin lines across the wooden floor. The snow had stopped falling by the next morning, but the silence that followed was even heavier. Malik Turner sat near the dying fire, a mug of coffee cooling in his hands, his eyes fixed on the creature lying just a few feet away. The wolf, now wrapped in an old flannel blanket, breathed slow and shallow, its ribcage rising like the tide. The room smelled of smoke, antiseptic, and wildness. Malik studied its face, the faint scar across its muzzle, the twitch of its ear with every creak of the cabin. He didn't know why, but it calmed him. There was a strange peace in caring for something that didn't speak, something that didn't ask for reasons. Maybe because that was what his life had become, quiet duties for things that couldn't talk back. He poured more wood into the fire and checked the bandages again. The wound was ugly, but clean. He'd seen worse on men who made it home. As he leaned back, exhaustion started to pull at his body again. That's when a sound from outside broke the stillness, a car engine, faint but real. Malik frowned. No one was supposed to come up this far, not in this weather. He limped to the window, brushing frost from the glass. The sight that met him froze him in place. A small blue pickup crawled up the hill tires, crunching over the ice. And behind the wheel, bundled in a red parka, was a face he hadn't expected to see for weeks. "Lila," he whispered. By the time she burst through the door, snow in her hair, Malik had barely managed to move the wolf behind a blanket near the wall. "Dad," she shouted, dropping her bag, her breath steaming in the air. "You didn't call. I heard there was a blizzard. Are you crazy coming out here alone?" She stopped mid-sentence, noticing the bloodstains on the floorboards, the shredded rope, and her father's bandaged hand. "Oh my God, what happened?" He held up a hand. "It's fine, sweetheart. I'm fine." But she'd already noticed the shape under the blanket. "What's that?" Malik hesitated. "A wolf," he admitted quietly. "I found him in the ravine last night." Her eyes widened in disbelief. "You what? You brought a wolf inside the house?" She took a step closer before Malik could stop her. "Don't," he warned. "He's hurt. He needs rest." But Lila wasn't listening. She crouched near the blanket, pulling it back slightly, and gasped. The camera around her neck slid forward. "Dad, I know this wolf." Malik frowned. "What do you mean you know him?" Lila opened her camera, scrolling through photos. "I've been tracking him for months for my photography project. The ridge wolf they call Ghost. Everyone thought he disappeared. I took a shot of him 3 weeks ago near the old logging road." She turned the screen toward him. There in the photo was the same creature, same golden eyes, same scar. "You saved him," she whispered, her voice softening. You actually saved Ghost." Malik rubbed his temple, unsure whether to laugh or curse. "Ghost, huh? Fitting name." The wolf stirred at the sound of their voices, lifting its head slightly. Its gaze locked onto Lila. She froze, every instinct telling her to back away, but she didn't. Instead, she sat down on the floor, crossing her legs slowly. "It's okay," she said, barely above a whisper. "You're safe." Malik reached for his rifle out of habit, but the wolf didn't snarl or rise. It simply stared at Lila, the air between them charged with something strange, unspoken. Lila extended her hand, palm up. Malik held his breath, ready to intervene. The wolf hesitated, sniffed the air, and then impossibly lowered its head to rest its muzzle near her fingers. Lila exhaled shakily, tears forming in her eyes. "He's not afraid," she said softly. "He knows." Malik's chest tightened. "Knows what?" She glanced back at him. "That you didn't save him just to feel useful, Dad. You did it because you saw something in him that still matters." He wanted to argue, to tell her she was wrong, that he'd only done his job. But the words wouldn't come, because she wasn't wrong. That night, the temperature dropped again, and the cabin filled with the low groan of settling wood. Lila cooked soup from the few cans she found, insisting Malik eat something other than coffee and regret. The wolf ghost lay near the fire, his breathing slow but steady. When Lila knelt to refill his water bowl, he didn't move. Instead, his eyes followed her every motion, his tail twitching faintly. Malik watched from his chair, a quiet warmth spreading in his chest that had nothing to do with the fire. His daughter, his miracle, was here, and for the first time in years, laughter echoed inside these walls. "You know," she said between sips, "Mom would have loved him." Malik's throat tightened. "Yeah," he said quietly, "she would have." When night fell, the wind began again, rattling the windows, shaking the shutters. Malik built the fire higher and set out extra blankets, but Lila refused to sleep in the bedroom. "I'm staying here," she said firmly. "If he wakes up, scared, someone should be near him." Malik shook his head, but smiled. "You're your mother's daughter." She curled up near the hearth, head resting on her backpack. The wolf lifted its head, once looked at her, and then lowered it again, as if granting permission. Malik sat watching them for a long time, the firelight painting their faces in gold and shadow. Sometime past midnight, Malik dozed off in his chair. The storm outside roared snow, slamming against the cabin walls like fists. In his half-sleep, he thought he heard movement, a low sigh, a shift of weight on the floorboards. He opened his eyes slightly. What he saw made his breath catch. The wolf had moved closer to where Lila slept. Its body curled protectively beside her. Its head rested gently against her knee, its breath visible in the dim glow. For a long time, neither of them stirred. The scene was so impossibly still, so pure, that Malik didn't dare move. The sound of the wind softened. The fire crackled. The years of grief and silence that had buried him seemed to melt away in that one fragile image. A wild animal, a child, and the space between them filled with trust. He closed his eyes again, whispering a quiet thank you to the dark, not sure to whom it was meant. The snow began to melt along the edges of the cabin roof by the fourth day, dripping in soft, rhythmic patterns that marked the end of the storm. Malik sat at the wooden table near the window, mending a torn glove while the morning light filtered through the frost. Across the room, the wolf they had named Ghost was awake, its golden eyes following every movement he made. It had eaten little since the rescue, only drinking small sips of water, and Malik could see the hesitation still lingering behind its gaze, a creature caught between instinct and trust. Lila, on the other hand, seemed to have found her rhythm around the animal. She moved with the careful confidence of someone who had learned how to earn space without asking for it. She spoke to Ghost softly as she cleaned his bandage, whispering things that only he could hear. Sometimes Malik caught fragments of her words, gentle encouragements, the same tone Emma used to use when Lila was a child, afraid of thunderstorms. It stirred something in him that he hadn't felt in years. Watching his daughter's hands tend to the wolf's wounds, he saw how time had hardened her edges, but not her heart. He envied that. That morning, the sky outside cleared completely, and the peaks in the distance blazed gold under sunlight. Malik poured coffee into 2 mismatched mugs and handed one to Lila. "You should head back soon," he said quietly. "Roads will thaw by afternoon." She shook her head immediately. "Not until he's strong enough to walk." Her voice carried the kind of certainty that left no room for debate. Malik smiled despite himself. "You talk like your mother, and you act like you're not still hurting," she shot back gently. He said nothing. The silence between them was heavy, but not sharp. It was the silence of 2 people who understood each other too well. A soft sound drew their attention. The scrape of claws on the wooden floor. Ghost was trying to stand. Malik set his mug down instantly. "Easy there," he said, rising from his chair. The wolf braced its front legs, trembling under its own weight. Lila knelt beside it, murmuring, "You can do it, just a little at a time." Malik stood back, watching her coax the animal as if she'd done it 100 times before. Ghost took one halting step, then another, its bandaged leg shaking but steadying with each motion. The sound of its claws tapping the floor echoed through the cabin like fragile hope. "Good boy," Lila whispered, reaching for a small piece of bread she had left on a plate. She broke it in half and held it toward him. "Here, you've earned this." Malik opened his mouth to protest. Wolves didn't eat bread after all, but stopped when Ghost sniffed the offering, hesitated, and then leaned forward, tongue brushing her palm. Lila froze, eyes wide, tears threatening to spill. Malik exhaled slowly, feeling the tension drain from the room. "Guess he's made his choice," he murmured. Lila didn't look up. "No," she whispered. "He's remembering what kindness feels like." The next few days brought small miracles. Ghost began eating more, following Lila's voice around the room, watching her every move. Malik repaired the old shed outside, planning to move the wolf there once it was strong enough. He noticed the air in the cabin had changed the stillness, replaced by something warmer, almost domestic. Lila hummed while she worked, and even Malik found himself talking more, not just to her, but to the animal, as if it could understand. In a way, maybe it did. On the 5th evening as they sat near the fire, Malik caught himself laughing for the first time in years. Lila had just told a story about her photography trip in Oregon, where a deer had stolen her granola bar and left her stranded on a trail. Ghost's ears twitched at the sound of her laughter, his tail thumping softly against the floor. Malik shook his head. "You realize you've turned my cabin into a daycare for wolves." Lila grinned. "You love it." He started to deny it, but the truth showed in his smile. "Maybe I do." For a brief moment, everything felt simple again, father-daughter, and a creature that somehow made the silence between them feel alive. But the peace didn't last. It rarely did in Malik's world. That night, while Lila prepared tea, Malik decided to test how much trust the wolf had really built. He'd seen animals revert before how quickly instinct overrode bond, so he raised his voice suddenly more sharply than he intended. "Lila, I told you not to leave that window open." She flinched in surprise, turning toward him with confusion. Before either of them could move, Ghost stood up with a growl, stepping between them, body low, tail stiff, not in aggression, but in something else, something protective. Malik froze, his pulse spiking. "Easy, boy," he said, quickly lowering his tone. "It's okay." Lila's hand touched the wolf's back, and just like that, the growl faded into a whine. Ghost turned his head, looking back at her before settling down again. The entire exchange lasted less than 10 seconds, but it felt longer than a lifetime. Malik sat down slowly, rubbing a hand over his face. "Well," he said softly, "looks like I just lost an argument to a wolf." Lila didn't laugh. Instead, she crossed the room and hugged him, something she hadn't done since Emma's funeral. "He wasn't protecting me from you," she said quietly. He was protecting what's here. Malik frowned. What's that supposed to mean? She pulled back, smiling faintly. Us. That night, the moon rose bright over the mountains, casting silver light through the frost-streaked windows. Ghost slept near the door, his chest rising and falling in steady rhythm. Malik couldn't sleep. He sat by the fire, staring at the flickering embers, his mind replaying the image of the wolf stepping between them. There was something humbling about it, how easily a wild creature could recognize the fragility of peace and choose to guard it. Maybe he thought that was what Emma had meant when she told him that love wasn't about control, but about quiet protection. He looked toward Lila asleep on the couch, her hand resting near the wolf's paw. For the first time in years, he didn't feel alone in his grief. He felt anchored. As dawn approached, the first light painted the snow outside in soft gold. Malik stepped onto the porch, inhaling the sharp mountain air. Behind him, he heard the door creak, followed by the soft pad of paws. Ghost limped out beside him, head low, but alert. Malik crouched, running a hand gently over the animal's fur. You did good, boy, he murmured. The wolf's eyes met his clearer, now brighter. Malik smiled. You keep watching over her. Yeah, she's all I've got. Ghost tilted his head as if understanding, then turned his gaze toward the mountains. Together they stood in silence, two survivors bound by unspoken trust, watching the light rise over a world that for the first time in a long while didn't feel quite so cold. The days that followed were filled with a strange rhythm that neither Malik nor Lila wanted to end. The snow melted into thin streams that carved silver paths down the slope. The sun grew warmer each morning, and the silence that once haunted the cabin now felt like music. Ghost was healing slowly, but certainly. His limp was still there, but he could walk from the fireplace to the door on his own, pausing sometimes to look back at them as if asking permission to keep going. Malik found himself talking to him more than he cared to admit. When he worked on the roof, the wolf watched. When he sat down to carve new handles for the kitchen drawers, the wolf laid nearby. Even Lila noticed the shift. He doesn't just trust us, she said one morning as she filled his water bowl. He's learning how to belong. Malik didn't respond. He didn't want to break whatever fragile miracle had found its way into their lives. The past had a cruel way of returning when things finally felt calm, and it came again on a gray afternoon when the wind changed direction. A sound broke through the peace, a deep mechanical rumble growing louder until tires crunched on gravel. Malik looked up from his chair on the porch, frowning. Few people came this far without reason. Lila stepped beside him, her expression tightening. A pickup truck was climbing the hill, its headlights cutting through the mist. When it stopped, a man stepped out tall and heavy-set, with a face carved by years of work and grief. His clothes were clean, but old, his boots coated in dust. He stood there for a moment before calling out, "You the ranger?" Malik's hand instinctively went to his hip, though his gun wasn't there. "Depends who's asking." The man's voice cracked like dry wood. "Name's Thomas Mercer. You've got something that belongs to me." Lila stepped closer. "What are you talking about?" Mercer's eyes found hers, tired but sharp. "That animal in there? The wolf. Don't lie, miss. I followed the prince. He's the one that tore through my ranch last winter, killed 30 sheep and sent my boy running for his life. My wife, she never got over it." He swallowed hard, the words shaking. "She took her life 6 months later. My son hasn't spoken since." The wind carried his confession through the valley, turning the silence heavy. Malik's jaw tightened. He'd heard stories like this before, grief twisted into vengeance. "Mr. Mercer," he said calmly, "you've got the wrong wolf. This one's been here since the blizzard. He was injured, half dead when I found him." Mercer stepped forward, his boots sinking into the mud. "You don't know that. Wolves like that don't change. They kill because that's what they are." Ghost appeared at the doorway, then his head low, golden eyes reflecting the light. Malik moved slightly in front of him, not to hide, but to protect. Lila's voice trembled. You said it happened last winter, right? Mercer nodded. She pulled the camera from around her neck, flipping through the photos until she found the one she needed. This picture was taken 3 weeks ago here near the ridge. That's him. Same scar, same eyes. He couldn't have attacked your ranch. He wasn't even close to your property. She handed him the camera. Mercer stared at the screen, his rough hands shaking. The image was Clearghost standing proud against a backdrop of snow and sunlight, a creature of the wild, not of malice. He looked at it for a long time before lowering the camera. You sure it's the same one? Lila nodded. I'd know him anywhere. For a long while, no one spoke. The only sound was the whisper of wind through the trees. Mercer's expression cracked first, not anger, but something more painful. His shoulders sagged. Then I've been hunting the wrong ghost, he said, his voice breaking. I thought if I could find the one that took everything from me, maybe I could make it stop hurting. Malik stepped forward, and his tone gentle but steady. Anger's a hard thing to let go of, Mr. Mercer. It keeps you warm when the world goes cold, but it doesn't fix what's gone. Mercer laughed bitterly. Easy for you to say. You didn't bury your wife. Malik's face tightened. No, but I buried mine. That silenced him. Lila looked between them, the air thick with a shared sorrow too heavy for words. Mercer's gaze dropped to the wolf again. Ghost hadn't moved. He simply stood there, watching calm as stone. The man's lips trembled. I dreamed of killing him every night. I thought if I saw those eyes again, I'd pull the trigger without a second thought. He shook his head. But standing here now, I can't even hate him. Maybe I never really hated him. Maybe I just hated that he survived when she didn't. Malik nodded slowly. Grief makes us do strange things. Mercer's knees buckled slightly, and he sank onto the porch steps, his hands covering his face. All this time, he whispered, I've been chasing the wrong thing. Lila stepped forward, her voice soft. You've been chasing what you couldn't forgive. He looked up at her eyes glistening. And what about you, girl? You ever lose something that ripped the world out from under you? She nodded. Yeah, she said, glancing at her father. We both did, but we're trying to learn that forgiveness isn't for the dead, it's for the living. Mercer's breath hitched, a single tear tracing down his weathered cheek. He stared at Ghost again, who tilted his head eyes calm and unreadable. The man's hand twitched towards his belt, but instead of reaching for the rifle slung over his shoulder, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small leather locket. He opened it, revealing a faded picture of a woman and a young boy standing in front of a white fence. He held it out to Malik. Her name was Ruth. She loved animals. Always said wolves were just dogs that learned to survive without us. He laughed bitterly. Guess she was right. Malik accepted the locket quietly, studying the photo before handing it back. She was a good woman, he said softly. Mercer nodded, unable to speak. After a long silence, Malik gestured toward the door. Come inside, sit by the fire. The man hesitated, glancing again at the wolf. He won't hurt you, Malik assured. Not if you don't give him a reason. Mercer followed them in removing his hat. The warmth of the fire met his skin, and his eyes softened as he watched Lila tend to the wolf's bandage. Ghost looked up at him, sniffed the air once, then lowered his head to the ground, showing no threat. Mercer swallowed hard. He's just a living thing, he murmured. All this time, I made him into a monster because I needed something to blame. Lila smiled faintly. That's what humans do when we're hurt. We turn pain into an enemy so we don't have to feel it. When Mercer finally left that evening, the sun was setting behind the ridge the world painted in orange and silver. He paused at the edge of the porch, looking back at Malik and Lila standing beside the door. You keep that wolf safe, he said quietly. You're doing what I should have done, learning to let the living live. Malik nodded. And you take care of your boy. Mercer's eyes watered. Maybe now I can. He climbed into his truck, started the engine, and disappeared down the winding road. The morning after Mercer's visit was the first one that truly felt like peace. The air was crisp, the kind that made every breath sting with life, and the valley glowed beneath a sky so blue it almost hurt to look at. Malik stood on the porch sipping coffee, his eyes scanning the snow-dusted ridge where the sun was beginning to climb. Inside the cabin, Leela sat cross-legged on the floor, typing quietly on her laptop, the rhythmic sound of her keys blending with the crackle of the fire. Ghost lay stretched near the doorway, half in shadow, half in sun, his golden eyes following every shift of light. He looked stronger, healthier. The wound on his leg had nearly closed, the fur beginning to grow back over the scar. Malik set down his mug and leaned on the railing. "You think he's ready?" he called through the open door. Lila looked up. For what? Malik smiled. For the world again. A few minutes later, Malik whistled softly, and Ghost rose, stretching his long frame. Malik wrapped a light rope around his chest, not as restraint, but as guidance. Lila followed them outside, camera in hand. The snow crunched underfoot, and the air smelled like pine and thawing earth. Malik walked slow, letting Ghost set the pace. At first, the wolf limped uncertain, but soon his stride grew smoother, his ears pricked high. They reached the meadow where the blizzard had once buried them alive, but now it was open, dotted with patches of green poking through the melting snow. Malik stopped and knelt beside him. "This is where you almost died, boy," he said softly. "Guess it's only fair you learn how to live here too." Ghost sniffed the ground tail, flicking once. Then his head lifted sharply. His ears turned towards the distant hills, his entire body going still. Malik frowned. "What is it?" Lila froze, lowering the camera. A sound drifted through the wind, low, haunting, unmistakable. A howl. Then another. Before Malik could grab the rope, Ghost lunged forward, breaking free and sprinting toward the trees. Ghost Malik shouted, running a few steps before his injured ankle gave out. Lila caught his arm. "Dad, wait." But he shook her off. "He's hurt. He won't survive out there yet." They watched as Ghost's figure vanished between the dark pines, his fur flashing silver in the light, before the forest swallowed him whole. For a moment, neither spoke. Only the wind answered back, carrying that eerie, beautiful sound of wolves calling from miles away. Lila lowered her head. "He heard them," she whispered. "His pack." Malik's chest ached with something that wasn't quite anger and wasn't quite loss. "He wasn't ours to keep," he said, voice rough. "I just thought maybe he'd stay." They spent the afternoon searching. Malik followed tracks through melting snow, every print fading faster under the sun. He called out until his voice cracked, but the forest gave nothing back except the creak of branches and the echo of his own desperation. Lila walked beside him, scanning with her lens. "He's smart," she said, her voice trembling. "He'll find a way." Malik clenched his jaw. Sometimes smart isn't enough. By dusk, they returned to the cabin, empty-handed. The porch felt colder, emptier. Lila sat on the steps, hugging her knees, the camera lying beside her. "I knew this would happen," she said softly. "He's wild. He belongs out there." Malik sank beside her, the wood creaking under his weight. "Yeah," he said, after a long silence, "but that doesn't make it hurt less." Night fell heavy, the kind of dark that swallowed the valley whole. Malik couldn't sleep. He sat by the window, eyes fixed on the tree line. Every time the wind shifted, he thought he heard movement, a shadow, a sound that might have been a paw against the earth. But nothing came. Around midnight, he gave up waiting and went outside. The cold bit at his skin, the world wrapped in silence. "Ghost," he called out again. His voice carried, then faded into nothing. He turned to go back inside, heart sinking, and then he froze. From the far edge of the meadow came a sound, a soft whimper, low and uncertain. Malik squinted into the darkness. Two glowing points of gold stared back. Then movement, slow, deliberate, familiar. "Well, I'll be damned," he whispered. Ghost emerged from the trees, limping slightly, his fur streaked with dirt and snow. Malik started toward him, relief flooding through him until he saw what followed. Behind Ghost, two smaller shapes stumbled forward. They were thin, one favoring a back leg, the other barely able to stand, Wolf's younger half starved. Malik's breath caught. Ghost turned his head toward them, then toward Malik, as if asking for permission. Lila, awakened by the noise, stepped onto the porch, hand over her mouth. "Dad, he brought them." Malik nodded slowly, awe spreading through his chest. "He didn't run away," he said quietly. "He went to bring them home." Ghost led the pair across the meadow, pausing once to glance back at the forest as though making sure no one followed. When they reached the porch, the smaller wolves hesitated. Ghost nudged the weaker one forward with his muzzle, then looked at Malik expectantly. Malik knelt, his voice gentle. "You crazy, beautiful thing," he murmured. "You couldn't just save yourself, could you?" The wolf's eyes gleamed steady and bright. Malik opened the cabin door and stepped aside. "All right," he said. "Let's get you all warm." Inside, the fire still glowed faintly. The younger wolves curled near the hearth, instantly collapsing in exhaustion. Lila moved quietly, filling a bowl with water, tears shining in her eyes. Ghost stood watch between them, his body tense but calm, his gaze fixed on Malik. There was no wild defiance left there, only quiet recognition. "You did good," Malik said, voice thick. He knelt, placing a hand on Ghost's shoulder. The wolf leaned into it briefly before pulling away to lie down beside the others. Lila sat beside Malik, whispering, "He went back for them. He couldn't leave them behind." Malik nodded. "That's what loyalty looks like." They stayed there for hours, listening to the faint breathing of the wolves, the firelight flickering over their faces. Lila finally spoke, her voice soft. "You think they'll go when they're strong again?" Malik looked at Ghost, then out the window toward the endless line of trees. "Probably," he said. "That's the way it's supposed to be." She rested her head on his shoulder. "And you'll let them?" Malik smiled faintly. "Yeah, because I know they'll remember how to find their way back." When dawn broke, the valley shimmered under a thin mist, and for the first time in years, Malik felt no weight pressing on his chest. He stepped outside, breathing deep, the air cool and alive. Behind him came the sound of paws on the porch, 3 sets this time. Ghost stood beside him, the 2 young wolves at his back, all 3 gazing toward the forest that waited beyond the clearing. Malik placed a hand over his heart and whispered, "Go on, boy. You've done your part." But Ghost didn't move yet. He turned his head toward Lila, who stood in the doorway, watching with tears in her eyes. For a long moment, man and wolf looked at each other across that quiet space, bound by something older than words, respect, gratitude, love without possession. Then, without sound or ceremony, Ghost stepped forward into the trees, the smaller wolves following close behind. The following week passed in a fragile balance between peace and tension, as though nature itself was holding its breath. The 3 wolves remained near the cabin, sleeping close to the porch at night and exploring the tree line during the day. Malik had grown used to the sound of their paws crunching over frost, their shadows gliding across the windows whenever the firelight flickered. Ghost had taken to watching Malik as he worked, cutting wood, repairing the fences, patching the roof. There was no fear in his eyes anymore, only recognition. Lila photographed them every morning, capturing what she called a miracle in motion. Malik never said it aloud, but he had come to feel the same. It was as if the wild and the human had struck a silent treaty, respect without ownership. But peace, Malik knew, was never permanent. It always demanded something in return. It happened just before dusk, on a day painted in the orange of dying light. Malik was stacking firewood when the sound cracked through the valley, sharp, distant, unmistakable. A gunshot. His heart lurched. Ghost, resting near the tree line, snapped his head toward the sound, ears stiff. The 2 younger wolves that had followed him began pacing, whining low. "No," Malik muttered, grabbing his rifle and slinging it over his shoulder. "Not today." Lila rushed out from the cabin. "Dad, what was that?" He didn't look back. "Stay inside, Lila, and don't let the fire die." She started to protest, but the look in his eyes stopped her cold. Malik moved fast down the slope, snow crunching under his boots. The wind carried the smell of smoke and metal. Ghost ran beside him, muscles rippling under his coat, his breath visible in sharp bursts. "You hear it too, don't you?" Malik said between breaths. The wolf's head lowered in response, his pace quickening. They reached the edge of the river just as twilight fell. The sound came again, not a gunshot this time, but something worse. A cry high and raw, filled with pain. Malik's stomach turned. They found the younger male wolf tangled in a snare near the water's edge, its leg twisted at an unnatural angle. The trap was a brutal thing, steel jaws biting through flesh. Malik dropped to his knees, his hands trembling with both rage and urgency. "Easy, easy," he whispered, cutting through the frozen wire with his knife. The wolf thrashed weakly, teeth bared in terror. Ghost circled them, pacing, growling low at the trap, as though he understood the cruelty of it. "Hold still, damn it," Malik muttered, voice shaking. "I'm not your enemy." The metal finally gave way with a sharp snap. Malik caught the wolf before it collapsed, its blood staining his gloves. The animal's chest rose and fell in shallow bursts, its eyes glassy. "We need to get him back," Malik said, hoisting the limp body over his shoulder. The cold burned through his jacket, but he didn't stop. Behind him, Ghost pressed close, nudging his elbow as if guiding him forward. The climb back to the cabin felt endless. Snow began falling again, thin at first, then heavier until the path blurred into whiteness. Malik stumbled twice, knees buckling under the weight. "I can't carry both of us," he muttered, half to himself, half to the wolf walking beside him. Ghost barked once, a sharp sound that startled him. The wolf moved ahead, pushing through the drifts, then turned and grabbed the hem of Malik's jacket between his teeth, tugging gently. "You trying to pull me up?" "Huh," Malik grinned through the exhaustion. "All right, partner, let's go." Together they climbed, one man and one wolf bound by something beyond instinct or reason. When they reached the porch, Leela burst through the door. "Dad," she cried, rushing to help. Her eyes widened when she saw the blood. "Oh God, is he not yet?" Malik said, quickly pushing inside. They laid the young wolf by the fire. The second wolf, a smaller female, whimpered and circled him, nudging his neck. Lila grabbed the medical kit and knelt beside her father. "Tell me what to do." Malik worked fast, his movements sharp but precise. He cleaned the wound, wrapped it tightly, and whispered to the animal in the same low tone he'd used on Ghost weeks before. "You're not dying here, not in my house." The firelight danced across his face, sweat and blood mixing under his chin. Ghost sat nearby, silent eyes flickering between the injured wolf and Malik's hands. Lila looked up at him once. "He knows," she whispered. "He's watching to see if you can save him." Malik didn't answer. He didn't have to. The silence was thick with meaning. Hours passed. The storm outside grew worse, wind howling through the chimney snow, slamming against the windows like fists. Malik stayed awake, refusing to let the fire fade. The young wolf stirred occasionally, its breathing ragged but alive. Lila dozed on the couch, her head resting on her knees. Ghost never moved from his spot. At one point he rose, padded to Malik's side, and lowered his head beside his arm. Malik's hand fell naturally onto his fur fingers, curling into the warmth. "We did what we could," he murmured. "Now it's up to him." Ghost lifted his head, then turned toward the window and released a sound so soft Malik almost missed it, a low, mournful howl that grew in pitch, echoing across the valley. It wasn't a cry of grief or warning. It was something else, a call for strength, for life. Malik's chest tightened. For a moment he could almost believe that sound carried something beyond this world. By dawn the snow had stopped. The storm had spent its rage, leaving a pale stillness behind. Malik sat slumped in his chair, eyes half closed. He stirred when he felt movement near his feet. The wounded wolf had lifted its head. Its gaze was faint, but alive, the shallow rise of its chest steady. Lila woke and gasped softly. "Dad, he made it." Malik smiled, weakly, exhaustion lining his face. "Yeah, he did." Ghost stood over the younger wolf, pressing his muzzle gently against its neck before turning to Malik, their eyes meeting in quiet understanding. "You saved him," Malik said softly, "just like I saved you." He reached for the tin cup beside him and raised it slightly, a toast to the firelight and everything still breathing within it, to the ones who make it home. That evening, Malik stepped outside to bury the broken trap near the river, driving it deep into the frozen earth. He stood there for a long time, the wind tugging at his coat, his eyes scanning the tree line. He thought of Mercer, of the soldiers he'd lost overseas, of his wife, and the long road that had brought him here. Maybe this was the price of peace, constant vigilance, constant care. When he returned to the cabin, Ghost was lying near the doorway, his pack sleeping beside him. Malik paused in the threshold, looking at the scene. The fire-glowing Lila, sleeping against the wall, and 3 living beings who should have been dead, but weren't. He felt something shift inside him, then something slow and irrevocable. Maybe redemption didn't come in grand gestures. Maybe it came in nights like this, quiet, bruised, but breathing. The days following the storm carried a fragile calm, the kind that felt too perfect to last. The sky cleared to a deep, endless blue, and sunlight glittered off the melting snow like shards of glass. Malik spent his mornings chopping wood, Lila organizing her photographs, and the 3 wolves exploring the perimeter of the clearing. Ghost had grown stronger, moving with that quiet confidence of a creature that no longer feared its scars. The younger wolves followed him everywhere, mimicking his posture, his stillness, even his patience. Lila watched them with a tenderness she didn't try to hide. "They're not just surviving," she said one afternoon as she adjusted her camera lens. "They're learning from him, like a family." Malik nodded but said nothing. He knew the wilderness didn't offer guarantees. It gave gifts with one hand and took them away with the other. Still, for the first time in years, he felt something close to peace. He didn't know that peace was already on borrowed time. It began with the sound of an engine. Malik heard it before he saw it. A distant hum carried through the valley like a warning. He stepped onto the porch, wiping his hands on his jeans. The vehicle was climbing the ridge, kicking up slush as it went. It wasn't Mercer's old pickup. This one was newer, dark green, with the government insignia stamped on the door. Malik's jaw tightened. "Stay inside," he called to Lila. "Why?" she asked, stepping to the window. But when she saw the logo Wildlife Enforcement Division, her face fell. "Dad, no, I'll handle it," he said. Ghost, lying near the porch steps, lifted his head, sensing the tension before a word was spoken. The truck stopped, and a man stepped out, mid-40s uniform, crisp badge gleaming in the winter light. "Mr. Turner," he called, walking toward him. Malik folded his arms. "Depends who's asking." The man smiled thinly. "Officer Brent Lowell. We've had reports of wolves frequenting this area. Attacks on livestock frightened residents. You wouldn't happen to know anything about that, would you?" Malik held his gaze, unflinching. "Those wolves aren't the ones you're looking for." Lowell's expression didn't change. "Mind if I take a look around?" "Yeah," Malik said. "I do mind." The officer's tone hardened. "Sir, these animals are protected under federal law, but when they pose a risk, relocation is necessary." Malik took a step forward. "Relocation, huh? That's a nice word for tearing them from everything they know." Lowell sighed, pulling a small tranquilizer rifle from his truck. "I don't want trouble. I'm just doing my job." "That's what they all say," Malik muttered. Before he could speak again, Ghost emerged from behind the porch, his body low, his eyes sharp but calm. The younger wolves followed close behind, wary but not fearful. Lowell raised the rifle instinctively. "Back up, sir." Malik stood his ground. "You pull that trigger and you'll regret it." Lila burst through the door. "Don't you dare shoot," she shouted, running to her father's side. "They've hurt no one." They saved each other. They saved us. Lowell didn't lower the gun. Ma'am, I understand, but these animals can't stay this close to human property. I'll take them to the sanctuary up north. They'll be safe there. Malik's voice dropped to steel. Safe doesn't mean alive. They'll break them. They'll cage what can't be caged. The officer hesitated, his eyes flicking between Malik and the wolves. I don't have a choice. Malik stepped in front of Ghost. Then make one. For a long second, no one moved. The wind stirred, carrying the faint scent of pine and smoke. Then Lowell exhaled sharply and aimed. The rifle hissed, a dart whistled through the air. But before it could hit, the wounded young wolf lurched forward, planting itself in front of Ghost. The dart struck its shoulder. It staggered, yelped once, and fell to the ground. No. Lila screamed, rushing forward, but Malik caught her arm. Ghost let out a deep, guttural growl, the kind that vibrated through the earth, his fur-bristling teeth bared, not in rage, but heartbreak. Malik turned, eyes blazing. You see that he shouted at the officer. You think he's a monster. Look again. Lowell froze the rifle, trembling in his grip. The young wolf struggled weakly on the ground, the tranquilizer already dulling its movements. Ghost crouched beside it, licking its face, whining low. Lila knelt too, tears streaking her cheeks. You can't take them, she whispered. Please just look at them. Malik's voice cut through the cold air, deep and steady. You came here to control the wild, but you're looking at something you'll never understand. That little one took a bullet to protect the very creature you think is dangerous. That's not survival instinct. That's love. The officer's face tightened, his certainty cracking. They still don't belong here. Malik stepped closer, his voice softening. Maybe they belong more than we do. For a moment, neither man spoke. The younger wolf's breathing slowed, and Malik gently lifted its head. He'll be fine, he murmured. It's just a tranquilizer. He looked up at Lowell again. You've done your duty. Now do the right thing. Lowell's shoulders sagged. He lowered the rifle. You understand if anyone finds out I was here and left them. Then tell them the snow was too thick, the track's too faint, Malik said. Tell them whatever you have to, but don't take them. The officer's hand lingered on the rifle for a moment longer before he finally nodded. You've got until spring, he said quietly. After that, they'll send someone who won't hesitate. Malik gave a curt nod. That's more mercy than I expected. Lowell glanced once more at the wolves, his expression caught between duty and doubt. For what it's worth, he said as he turned to leave. I don't think they're the problem. He climbed into his truck and drove away, leaving only silence behind. Inside, Malik and Lila tended to the tranquilized wolf, wrapping it in blankets until its breathing steadied. Ghost never left its side. When it finally stirred, weak but alive, Lila smiled through tears. He's okay, she whispered. Malik sat back, exhausted. You hear that he said quietly to Ghost. Even men with badges can learn. Ghost blinked slowly, then lowered his head onto his paws. The fire crackled soft and steady, warming the small space that had become their fragile sanctuary. Later that night, Malik stepped outside alone. The sky was clear stars scattered across the dark, like shattered glass. He looked towards a ridge where Lowell's truck had vanished hours earlier. Maybe mercy was a currency still worth spending in this world. Behind him, he heard soft footsteps. Ghost emerged from the cabin, his fur glinting under the moonlight. Malik crouched, running his hand over the wolf's head. You protected your family, he whispered, and now it's my turn to protect you. The wolf pressed his forehead gently against Malik's shoulder, a brief, powerful gesture of trust. Malik closed his eyes, holding on to that moment like a vow. The air had been unnaturally dry for days, the kind of dry that made the pine needles brittle and the ground crack underfoot. Malik noticed it first that morning while chopping wood. The silence between gusts of wind felt heavy charged, like the world itself was waiting to exhale. By noon, clouds gathered over the ridge, dark and swollen with tension. That doesn't look like rain, Lila murmured, stepping onto the porch camera hanging from her neck. Malik followed her gaze. The sky wasn't gray. It was copper, the color of warning. "Storm's coming," he said. Ghost stood at the tree line, fur rippling nose lifted toward the wind. He could smell it before they could see it. The ozone, the smoke, the coming danger. Malik's instincts flared. He'd seen this before back in his ranger days. One strike was all it took. One spark, and the mountain would burn. It happened an hour later. Lightning ripped through the sky like the crack of a whip slamming into the dry ridge above the valley. The sound came first, then the flash, then the distant roar, deep and rolling like something alive. Lila gasped. "Dad," Malik was already moving. "Pack what you can. We're leaving." He ran inside, grabbing the emergency kit and maps his movements sharp and sure. "Take the camera, not the laptop." "We don't have time," Lila hesitated, looking around the cabin that had become their refuge. "What about them?" she asked, turning toward the door where the wolves waited. "They'll follow," Malik said, though his voice cracked slightly. Ghost paced the porch, the younger pair whining nervously. The smell of smoke thickened, carried on the wind. When they stepped outside, Malik saw it. The fire crawling down the ridge, a wall of orange and black devouring everything in its path. "We head east," he said, grabbing Lila's hand. "Toward the river. It'll be slower there." They moved fast through the clearing, Malik leading Ghost, and the wolves flanking them like silent guardians. The air grew hotter, thicker, until every breath burned. Sparks drifted like fireflies through the smoke. Behind them, the cabin began to disappear in haze. "Keep low," Malik shouted, pulling his shirt over his mouth. Lila coughed, tears cutting through the soot on her cheeks. Ghost barked sharply, circling around them, urging them forward. They reached the edge of the forest trail just as a burning branch crashed behind them, scattering embers. The young wolves yelped and bolted ahead, but Ghost stayed close, guiding Malik and Lila through the smoke. "We're almost there," Malik yelled, but the fire was faster. Flames leapt from tree to tree, licking at the sky, the sound like waves breaking against shore. They reached the dry creek bed by dusk. Malik dropped his pack chest, heaving. "We rest here," he said, coughing into his sleeve. Lila collapsed beside him, clutching her camera against her chest, like it was the only thing tethering her to reason. "Dad," she rasped the cabin. "It's gone," he said quietly. "Doesn't matter. You're here. That's what matters." Ghost stood at the edge of the creek, staring back toward the inferno that glowed behind the hills. The young wolves huddled near the rocks, trembling. Then somewhere in the roar came a sound that froze Malik's blood, a faint cry. Human. He turned sharply. "Lila, did you hear that?" She frowned, shaking her head. But Ghost heard it too. His ears shot up, head turning toward the north ridge. Malik grabbed his flashlight. "Someone's trapped. Dad, wait." But he was already running. The wolves followed Ghost, leading the charge through the rising smoke. The cry came again, clearer this time. Malik climbed over a fallen log and saw her. Lila caught between two burning trees, her jacket snagged on a root. "Dad," she screamed. The fire circled like a beast closing in. Malik sprinted forward, heat searing his face, lungs, screaming. The path was blocked by flames. "Hold on," he shouted. He looked around wildly, searching for an opening, but there was none. Then, before he could react, Ghost barreled past him, a blur of gray and gold. No, Malik roared, but the wolf didn't stop. He charged straight through the fire, fur igniting in sparks, teeth snapping at the burning root that trapped Lila's coat. She sobbed, trying to pull free. Ghost bit the fabric and yanked with all his strength, dragging her backward through the smoke. The fire howled around them, sparks flying like angry bees. Malik dove in, grabbing his daughter and pulling her into his arms as Ghost stumbled beside them, his fur-smoking paws raw. Malik covered him with his jacket, beating out the embers. "You stupid brave soul," he whispered. Ghost's chest heaved, eyes glazed but alert. Lila clutched his neck, crying into his fur. "He saved me," she gasped. "He saved me." Malik looked around, the world dissolving in flame and ash. "We need to move now." He lifted Lila onto her feet, one arm around her shoulders, the other steadying Ghost. They stumbled through the smoke toward the river. The heat was unbearable, the air thick as oil. Malik's vision blurred. "Almost there," he rasped. "Just a little farther." They broke through the last line of trees and tumbled onto the muddy bank. The water was shallow but cold. Malik pulled Lila and Ghost into it, letting the current cool their burns. The wolves followed, panting eyes wide. The sky above was crimson, the fire's reflection dancing across the surface of the water. Lila clung to Ghost's neck. "Stay with me," she whispered. "Please stay." The wolf's breathing was shallow, his body trembling from exhaustion. Malik tore open the first aid kit, his hands shaking as he poured cool water over the burns. "Don't you dare quit on me," he muttered. Hours passed in a haze of smoke and orange light. By midnight, the fire began to retreat, devouring the far side of the ridge instead. Malik sat with his arm around Lila Ghost's head, resting on his knee. The smell of charred pine filled the air. Lila stroked the wolf's fur gently, whispering he's still breathing. Malik nodded, unable to speak. He looked out at the hills where their home had stood, now glowing embers against the night. Loss pressed heavy on him, but beneath it, a deeper gratitude stirred. Everything that mattered was still alive. He brushed a hand through Ghost's fur, feeling the steady pulse beneath. "You're tougher than fire," he whispered. "Guess that makes 3 of us." When dawn broke, the valley was a wasteland of gray and smoke. Ash drifted like snow over the water. Malik stood on the bank, his boots sinking into the mud. Behind him, Ghost stirred, struggling to stand. Malik rushed to help, but the wolf shook him off, lifting his head to the rising sun. His fur was scorched, his body scarred, but his spirit was unbroken. He tilted his head and howled a long, deep sound that carried across the burnt valley. The other wolves joined in their voices, weaving through the smoke like a hymn. Lila leaned into her father's shoulder, tears streaking her soot-covered cheeks. "He's saying we made it," she whispered. Malik knotted his throat tight. "Yeah," he said softly, "we made it." The valley took months to breathe again. When the smoke finally lifted, the forest that once sheltered Malik and his daughter lay stripped to bone, blackened trunks, scorched soil, and silence so heavy it pressed against the ribs. But even in ruin, there was rebirth. Tiny shoots of green clawed their way through ash, defiant and tender. The cabin had been reduced to a skeletal frame, the porch collapsed, the roof gone. Still, Malik refused to leave. Every morning he woke with the sunrise and worked his hands rough with splinters and soot, shaping what remained into something new. Lila helped him between her trips to town, documenting the recovery for her project photographs of loss turning into life. Sometimes they spoke of Ghost, sometimes they didn't. The words hurt too much, and yet his presence lingered everywhere in the paw prints etched into memory, in the faint howl that sometimes drifted through the twilight if the wind came from the north. Malik had stopped expecting to see him again, but he never stopped looking. Some bonds didn't fade. They waited. Winter came and passed. By spring, the valley began to bloom again. The air smelled of thawing earth and pine resin. Malik's rebuilt cabin stood smaller, but stronger than before, the wood still charred in places, but proud in its scars. The wolves' den near the ridge had long gone cold. Lila returned from the city one afternoon, camera full of life blooming out of ruin. "You did it, Dad," she said softly. "You brought it back." Malik smiled, wiping his hands on his jeans. "It wasn't just me. The land wanted to live." She looked towards the tree line. "Do you think he's still out there?" Malik didn't answer right away. He looked at the mountains, their peaks pale gold in the evening sun. "If he is," he said finally, "he's exactly where he belongs." That night, Malik couldn't sleep. The wind carried a strange rhythm, a whisper threaded with something familiar. He stepped outside barefoot, the boards cool beneath his feet. The moon was full, casting silver light across the valley. He paused halfway down the steps. There, imprinted in the soft ash beside the porch, were tracks large, distinct, unmistakable. His breath caught. "No," he whispered, kneeling to touch them. The prints were fresh, the edges sharp. They led toward the river. He grabbed his coat, his pulse quickening. The air was crisp, the sound of running water steady ahead. He followed the trail down the slope, every step stirring old hope. When he reached the bank, he stopped cold. Across the river, half hidden by the mist, stood Ghost. The wolf was larger than before, his fur streaked with white, the old burn scars tracing faint patterns along his flank. Behind him, two younger wolves waited, their eyes bright, their movements sure. Malik's throat tightened. "You came back," he said softly, voice trembling. Ghost tilted his head, studying him. The river separated them, but the distance felt sacred, not cruel. They didn't need to cross. They had already met halfway where words didn't matter. For a long time, they simply watched each other. Lila's voice echoed in Malik's mind. "He's saying we made it." He smiled faintly. "Yeah," he murmured, "we did." Ghost took a step forward, paused, sinking into the shallows. The younger wolves followed, but he stopped them with a low sound, turning his gaze back to Malik. His golden eyes gleamed beneath the moonlight, ancient knowing. Then he lifted his head and howled. The sound rolled through the valley, rising above the ruins, above the scars, carrying something greater than grief. It was not a farewell. It was a benediction, a promise. Malik closed his eyes, letting the sound wash over him. The world around him seemed to breathe again. The river, the trees, even the sky. When he opened them, the wolves were gone, vanished into the mist. Only the sound lingered, fading like smoke into the night. Malik stood there for a long time, the cold biting at his skin, but inside he felt only warmth. He looked down at the river, its surface shimmering with reflected stars, and whispered, "Thank you." The words weren't for the wolf alone. They were for everything: the fire, the loss, the pain, the love that refused to die, even when everything else did. The next morning, Lila found him on the porch, coffee steaming in his hands, eyes distant but peaceful. "Couldn't sleep again?" she asked. Malik smiled. "Didn't need to." She noticed the paw prints in the ash and froze. "Dad," she whispered, "was he here?" Malik didn't answer right away. He looked towards a river where the fog still clung to the water. "Yeah," he said finally. "He came to say goodbye." She sat beside him, silent for a long moment. Then she smiled through tears. "Or maybe to remind you that goodbye doesn't mean gone." Malik nodded, the corners of his eyes creasing with quiet gratitude. "You know," he said after a pause, "your mom used to say the world breaks so it can learn how to heal." Maybe she was right. Maybe some things burn so better roots can grow. Lila leaned her head against his shoulder. "You sound like a poet." He chuckled softly. "Nah, just a man who ran out of excuses to be angry." They sat there until the sun rose, painting the valley gold. The ash around the cabin glowed faintly, catching the light like scattered silver. From somewhere deep in the forest, a distant howl echoed again, faint, fleeting, but clear. Lila smiled. "He's still watching." Malik nodded. "So am I." That afternoon, Malik placed 3 stones beside the cabin, one for the fire that took their home, one for the wolf that saved his daughter, and one for the man he used to be, the one who thought survival was about fighting instead of forgiving. He stood there quietly, the wind tugging at his coat, the mountains stretching endlessly around him. He thought of Ghost, of the moment he first reached down that icy cliff to free a creature that should have hated him. He thought of the way the wolf had looked back even then, not with fear, but with something almost human. Trust. The valley would heal in time. The trees would grow back. The rivers would clear. And maybe someday new travelers would pass through and never know what had burned here. But Malik would remember. He'd remember that a wild heart had once chosen to save a man, a daughter, and everything fragile between them. He'd remember that love wasn't always gentle. It was fierce, demanding, unyielding. And he'd remember that sometimes the only way to keep something sacred is to set it free. When evening fell, Malik sat by the rebuilt fire pit, the glow reflecting in his eyes. Lila joined him, camera in hand. "Smile," she said softly. He did not the practiced smile of the past, but the real one born from scars that no longer hurt. She took the picture. Behind them, the wind stirred the trees, and for a brief second, Malik could swear he saw a shadow move along the ridge, a silhouette he knew by heart. Ghost paused once at the edge of the forest, looking back toward the cabin before disappearing into the fading light. Malik closed his eyes and whispered, "Run free, old friend." The fire crackled, and the stars blinked awake, scattered across the dark, like distant memories refusing to fade. In that quiet, Malik Turner understood at last that endings were never truly endings. They were beginnings disguised as lost ashes that held seeds for something waiting to grow. He took one last sip of coffee, smiled at the sound of the wind, and whispered, "Every life deserves a chance, even the broken ones." The end. Before you go, if this story touched you, take a moment to like and subscribe. It helps more than you think. Tell me what part stayed with you the most. Was it the moment Ghost ran through the fire, or when Malik finally understood what it meant to let go? I'd love to hear what you felt watching their journey unfold, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Every story finds its way somewhere new when shared by hearts like yours. Bye.